hardcore techno has had multiple iterations throughout the years, from its roots in places like the Netherlands and Belgium to its later evolutions that we all know and love, like raw style, Frenchcore, or uptempo. But a question has always arisen among producers since its inception. What if we go further? Some people answered this question with speed, increasing the BPM of tracks to increase the intensity. Artists like Aeswa, Diabarha, Cabario, or MIDI became the poster children of genres like speedcore and extratone, and subsequent iterations in the 2010s. On the other end of the spectrum, the question of intensity was answered directly, by dialing up the distortion and trying new forms of modulation. This is how we got pipe kicks from GPF, where the kick is no longer just a kick, but a driver for intensity through distortion and tonality, giving it this hypertonal quality. Expand it further, and you get the hardstyle producer's take on pipe kicks. Now, za kicks, where the attack, or the transient part that characterizes a kick as one, is often no longer present, or has become optional. The kick is replaced with synth-like distortion, somehow maintaining the four-on-the-floor rhythm, like a whisper of where its roots lie.
But what if I told you there was a very small period in 2020 where the question of how to go further was answered not with speed, nor sonic intensity, well, not in the traditional sense, but with this. What you just heard wasn't entirely intentional. Some knowledgeable people might recognize it as what happens when you over-distort a sound, a kick to be precise, to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. It's similar to how when you overexpose a picture, it makes everything but the brightest and darkest parts disappear. The sound still reads as a kick roll, but a muddy, low-resolution-ish version of it. The contrast still exists since there's still rhythm. But this isn't the main point. What I really want to draw your attention to is this particular excerpt. This, on the other hand, is a whole different beast. This ringing, distorted sound is what happens when you seemingly disobey all logic and distort the already distorted even further. When the kick is no longer the kick, but its intensity. When you answer the initial question with raw, unpurified distortion, a ship of Theseus in audio form. And if you think I'm overthinking it, brace yourself, because this is only the start of this rabbit hole. Well, before continuing, a small disclaimer. This is not my real voice. In fact, is not real at all. But I'm just trying something different for this video essay. And if you like it, hey, I might use it more. I mean, if the option's still available, of course. But yeah, further details in the description. With that out of the way, have you seen this meme? I mean, you might recognize it from the 4 stages of reality meme in the peak of amogus shitposting era, where each subsequent layer seems to collapse the reality further. It might seem hilarious to the uninitiated, when in reality, the caption comes from Baudrillard's book, Simulacra and Simulation, which is more of a critique on how we have drowned ourselves in symbols rather than the objects themselves, mistaking the map with the territory and all that shit, and how this distancing in our modern lives has made everything meaningless. Baudrillard names this process a procession of simulacra. While the book offers a more in-depth analysis of this process and their future implications for society, I'm not invoking his theory to critique modern life or anything along those lines. Instead, I want to use the 4 stages of simulacra in a broader way to describe the relationship of this sound with what came before in hardcore techno culture, especially on the internet. For that, we need some definitions. First stage, basic reflection of reality. This is the most straightforward layer. Imagine a picture of an orange. It's not the orange, but it still clearly refers to it. It reflects it. You see the picture and you know exactly what's being represented. This is still a stable sign. It points back to the real thing. Second stage, masking reality. Now imagine a bottle of orange juice. Maybe it says 100% juice, or maybe it's packed with additives and sweeteners, but it still calls itself orange juice. It's trying to maintain the illusion that it's just a liquid version of the fruit. It's detaching, but pretending not to. You're still supposed to believe it's the real deal. Third stage, marking the absence of reality. This is where things start to get weird. Picture this, an orange-flavored energy drink. You see it and is covered in pictures of orange slices, maybe it has a bright orange color in the can, but you know, deep down, this has nothing to do with fruit. It's all caffeine and taurine. The orange is a flavor profile, the aesthetic, a ghost. The sign ain't trying to hide the truth no more, it's standing in for something that is not longer even there. Fourth stage, pure simulacrum. Now picture a vape flavor based on that orange-flavored energy drink. No juice, no fruit, no caffeine, just vibes. It doesn't even pretend to be real. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. A flavor referencing a brand that referenced a fruit. At this point, the orange isn't part of the equation and the symbol exists purely to reinforce itself. There's no real behind it, just the echo of one. Coming back to the sound I use as an example, if we frame pipe and zog kicks as a third-stage simulacrum in the view of hardcore techno, then this new sound would be a fourth layer, referencing the pipe kicks, but ultimately being its own thing. And sure thing, you can pinpoint some of its references, but those references are themselves a distorted vision of the original thing. This may suggest that instead of being merely a continuation of the previous sounds, it might qualify as an evolution, or devolution, pick your poison, towards pure, raw distortion. But like most people, I didn't know about Baudrillard's theory at the time. Heck, who thinks of French philosophers on a daily basis? Anyway, I only saw it as what it was. A different sound that could become a different subgenre. Shortly after the song was released, I made a video where I tried and failed to articulate what this new sound could become. Starting with the most obvious observation, there was a noticeable lack of bass and sub-frequencies, rendering the sound flat but somehow piercing at the same time. This was achieved by selectively enhancing a specific part of the frequency spectrum to the point of distortion. There were also the obvious elements inherited from hardcore techno, such as a 4-on-the-floor rhythm and BPMs typically around 200 and above. So I made the case that it could be a new subgenre of up-tempo hardcore. The video ended with the basics, leaving viewers feeling somewhat empty-handed, but I moved on with my life, making a couple of songs in this style, with one being more experimental than the other, but still following the principles detailed previously, and forgetting about it soon after. But later, a couple of years later, I made a video categorizing all styles of hardcore techno. It was more like shameless promotion for a couple of my songs, including the one experimental attempt at recreating this new sound. But apparently it resonated with some people. Not only did the song I used as an example see an influx of views, but the other song I made in the style also got more views, indicating a certain interest in the genre. So Kadacore was born, named after the first song in the style, and defined by a very rigid system which felt both too vague and broad, yet crushingly strict. Hardcore techno without bass frequencies. The concept became gimmicky rather quickly. There were a couple more attempts at the genre using this definition as a mantra, but something was missing. The intensity that defined the first example started to fade. The tracks being somewhat polished seemed like a contradiction, as if the sound begged to be underground, something you weren't supposed to listen to. A fresh perspective was needed. Enter Yabu Jin, particularly through his alias DJ Gairata Zhao, where he reanimates jump style more as a full aesthetic proposition rather than just a plain revival. The resulting sound, which most people on TikTok tagged as Yabu Jin Core, but after it was coined as New Gen Jump Style, and it was paired with a visual and thematic identity that the aesthetic wiki of all places dubbed Xpiritualism. I mean, obviously they didn't create the term, as they point third world elite as the real culprit. Anyway, at its core, Xpiritualism draws from the imagery of early internet visual culture, particularly the deep cuts, such as low-res anime AMVs from YouTube's pre-HD era, obscure foreign forums, watermarked bootleg video clips, live leak shock footage, and all the janky, overcompressed design language that came straight out of the late 2000s look daddy, I'm a graphic designer school of thinking. This nostalgic reinterpretation is the internet's memory passed through a filter of cultural dislocation and technological naivete. Almost fetishistically foreign. While Western revivals like Frutiger Arrow try to repackage techno-optimism and the future they stole from us, new-gen jumpstyle sits more in the haunted liminal space, something like the backrooms of Euro-Asian net culture, from Belgian and Russian shuffle and jumpstyle dance scenes that once burned brightly on now-defunct forums and golden era YouTube.
It's here that hardcore techno starts serving a new function, leaving the traditional sense of it being as a vessel for intensity, but rather as a framework for internet-era myth-making. Maybe this was the kind of visual and sound identity that Kadacore lacked. Perhaps by borrowing some of these elements, we could gain a more precise view of the genre and leave all the gimmicks behind. So we entered early 2024 with a fresh perspective and all the motivation to make it work. And after some experimentation, a new Kadacore song was born into the world. This track was set to embrace the full extent of the fourth layer of simulacra, both in themes and presentation, as well as borrowing elements from the internet nostalgia aesthetic embraced by artists like Yabu Jin. See, it's coming all together. So it started with a proposition: what about the old internet we don't remember? The song quality wasn't particularly good, and it was the point. It seemed to reignite this fire that I thought was lost in the last couple attempts, like a statement of the genre refusing to die. I wasn't gonna let it die.
But before I can talk more about said song, we need to take some steps back, as this track was in spiritual response to one of my previous tracks, Killing the Darlings, which was the last attempt at Kadacore on my channel at the time. It contained this particular effect on the vocals and is called spectral gating. You might not recognize it by name, but you have definitely heard it. Now, you are thinking, ooh, it sounds just as the illegal MP3 I downloaded with Eris back in the day, I swear. And you wouldn't be mistaken, as it's one of the techniques used to reduce file size for MP3s, which on the example served as a way to leverage dial-up connection internet speed for that Carly Rae Jepsen single that was trending yesteryear. Besides, the effect is particularly distinctive, and especially at the lower bitrate ranges where some of the higher frequencies are filtered in the spectral domain, which is not as simple as a low-pass filter. It behaves more as if you were to take the image representation of a sound and increase the contrast between bright and dark zones, effectively decreasing its detail and then rendering it back as sound. Overdo it, and you end up with a very distinct, watery effect seasoned with muffled high frequencies that is quite reminiscent of back-in-the-day music piracy, or more likely, how old phone camera mics used to record sound before the addition of selfie cameras. Yep, it goes back that far. So 2024 brought this new perspective and a desire to further define the genre. This new track took the original idea of Kadacore, hardcore but no low frequencies, and expanded upon it, both in style and substance. In style, by using the old internet aesthetic and the MP3 compression artifacts as a sonic element. In substance, it used Baudrillard's framework to conceptually frame the process as a simulation of itself, even going so far as pairing this new sound with an older iteration of another genre that exploded in underground popularity around 2011, what used to be known as tear-out dubstep. Not that tear out, this tear out. Think Koki's Red Eye, or more popularly, .x's remix of Megan Diaz's Monster. But if I had to give a personal recommendation, deadmau5's Raise Your Weapon is also a great contender. Both aspects were mixed in when making the picture that accompanied this new song. And I forgot to address it earlier, but myself being a brony had heavily influenced the aesthetics on my channel and by proxy in the genre, as it's a tradition on this channel, please subscribe, to use a picture of a pony for the artwork. So previous Kadacore tracks, Coolidge Effect and Killing the Darlings, relied on using another person's artwork as visual anchor for the song, mostly because there was no visual identity for Kadacore yet, or at least until now. So, I borrowed the concept of 4D characters from the award-winning YouTuber JJ McCullough as a framework for its visual identity, and in doing so, constructing an artwork that could embody this new song as a standard for the genre. McCullough defines 4D characters as objects that require more than a single cultural or conceptual layer to be fully understood. This is similar to Baudrillard's 4 stages in the sense that these characters become a simulation of themselves due to the layers of understanding they require in order to exist. In simpler terms, if you were to show an alien one of these objects and ask the question, how many other cultural or conceptual elements do I need to explain first in order to make it understand it? And if the answer is 3 or more, it's definitely a 40 character. One example he gives is an artwork by Poole and Marianella, which depicts a Virgen de Guadalupe as a parody of Barbie dolls. In this example, you are supposed to know who the Virgin Mary was, how she was depicted in Mexican folklore as the Virgen de Guadalupe, and what a Barbie doll is as a brand. With the 40 concept in mind, as you can tell, the final image for this song was somewhat layered and on the nose if you didn't know all the references. So let me indulge and give you all an over-explained tour of my artwork for just a minute.
First and foremost, hey look, there is Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony. But wait, she is in her Pinkamena persona. Following that, if you notice, she has sleepy eyes and more pale skin than usual, like she was dead. That is because the outfit is an important element that explains why she looks like that. The wardrobe is quite specific, you see. She is cosplaying as Pope Formosus. That's why the track is called Formosus. F in the chat. Some confuse it with the term phimosis. My bad, won't get a happen again, I swear. Well, this Pope is famous for being held in judgment after his death, where his rotting corpse was put on trial. An interesting story considering how in Killing the Darlings, I was supposed to kill the genre, but this time I'm resurrecting it once more with this track. Actually, it's not just a resurrection, but a deconstruction.
That's why the final element, and the most layered of the bunch, is that she is undergoing a corpus callosotomy, similar to a lobotomy, but instead of becoming a shell of yourself by attacking the frontal lobe with an ice pick, you take both hemispheres of the brain and separate them by cutting the connective tissue known as the corpus callosum, which renders the sides unable to communicate each other effectively. This practice used to be performed to cure severe cases of seizures, where the electrical currents would propagate to the whole gray matter. And its curious adverse effects are terrifying, yet weirdly interesting. A severance of the brain into 2, a symbolic mind and a more literal one. Some people that underwent the surgery alerted their hands started to move on its own, sometimes as far as to trying to communicate by drawing on paper or even trying to choke the person. The details escape my area of expertise, but hope you get the gist of it.
And now that the image was conceptually done, the only thing left was giving it a space and time. So, as is now evident, I have chosen grunge metro, often considered the edgy cousin of Frutiger metro, which on its own is a subgenre of Frutiger aero. See, I wasn't lying. Layers over layers over layers. Anyway, this style, grunge metro, was popular in the late 2000s and early 2010s, particularly in scene/emo culture on platforms like MySpace, Facebook, and Tumblr. This aesthetic served as connective tissue, funnily enough, between the visual and sonic domains of the track, like the final color correction layer in a movie that holds everything together in a single cohesive shot. Formosus was released without much fanfare, and it received a little widespread attention, sitting just shy of 800 views at the date of writing this. Hey, future Nyanakaru here. A month have passed, and it seems we're still at 800 views. Keep it up, champ. Wait, where was I? Right. But the track still inspired a couple of people, like Kaluki, who definitely grasped the ideas behind the sound, consolidating the genre further as it now has some kind of overall aesthetic rather than being a clinical list of do's and don'ts. But it was still just a draft, a what if, an announcement.
Interest in Kadacore has slowly died down ever since. No more tracks, other than just a couple, have been released, and it is now seen more like a semi-ironic joke. Perhaps the genre hasn't had a broader or underground appeal to the level of new-gen jump style due to its innegatable noise influences. This is an interesting topic, as sonically it's somewhat similar to harsh noise and power noise, but weirdly different thanks to being somewhat a successor to pipe kicks rather than gabber or traditional hardcore techno. Its birth in the 2020s also lends it an ironic appeal, but I don't want to be the only person making it, as I think it could evolve even further into something interesting. The basis is here, and hopefully with this video is seen less like an ingredient list and more like already baked cakes people can taste and try to recreate with their own own spin. Take what you like and leave the rest. There's one last point that is defining the Kadacore subgenre and could maybe catapult it, which is its subreddit. Lately, I've made attempts to give it a stronger aesthetic, but that can be a topic for a new video, as this rant is more on a conceptual and sonic level, with just a pinch of developing its visual domain. So if you'd like to see a sequel to this video talking more in-depth about examples of images I would consider Kadacore coded, I would be glad to make it if there's enough interest. Thanks for your attention. Have a good one.